We're halfway through the executive administrator class, and I thought I'd take a second and kind of visit about a few items, but basically I want to talk about topics 5 through 8, which was part of Module 2. And the first one, of course, was a PowerPoint that had been presented by Roger Breed, and it was at a 2020 workshop that I was at, and he presented that to us, and we discussed some of the changes that are going on with student demographics. And I think most of you had a pretty good grasp of what was happening, and some of you are very, very much involved, sitting in school districts that have had a change in where the minority population has become somewhat more significant. Part of that too is many of you talked about, I guess I posed the question about lost school days, and I didn't really, it wasn't a big deal what your answer was, but I wanted you to be able to share some of the approaches that different districts are using to try to address absenteeism by students, and I think most of you did. Part of the discussion too, and there was how can we encourage people to be in education, and getting into education is how do we make that important to our young people. Many suggestions were salary, and of course we'd all like to see that happen. But I think that one of the biggest complaints I have, and I think one of the negative things about getting young people into education, is how some of our teachers, some of our administrators act about their job, and oftentimes they in front of senior students may talk about the negatives of education, or the pay, or why don't you go into engineering, you're good in these areas. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with giving suggestions to students, but a lot of people put education second, and sometimes we're our worst enemies. I think sometimes we do it. And I think, one of the things that education, I look back at my career, there was a lot of funny things and a lot of fun that went on, and I really would like to see people be a little more open about the positive things that happen in coaching or teaching or music. Some of the successes that you've had, I hope you would share. I'd give an example. It actually involves one of our students here in this class, and when we were doing the real thing, when we were face to face, I would have a couple principals come in and talk to my principalship class, and one came in and he talked about a lot of negative things, talked about how he required the school to put a back door in his office in case there was an issue, and just a lot of things that were negative. The next speaker we have is actually Jay Offman, who's a principal at Hastings. I hope he doesn't mind me mention his name, but just the opposite. You could tell he liked his job. You could tell he was interested in students. He was having fun, and it was just a completely different feel. And just from my students' discussion after those presentations, it was really impressive. The effect that he had on other people's concept of what a principal should be like or should do. So I just thought that was really a positive thing, and I think each of us can be positive about that. Topic 6 was effective meetings, and I just think that's really a good book. I try to leave this course open if people want to go back and check on some of those once they get in the position. But there were some pretty good items about the how to have a good meeting, and try to create situations where you're listening to what they have to say, and you might be responding to their negative comments. Some of the things in there was you might have an example of you're considering making a change in the school day, or I'll give an example from 7 to an 8 period day, and asking the question, what kind of proof, or what kinds of things would you need to support this decision. How can you help me, and how can I help you? And I think oftentimes the things that are done in a teacher's meeting are more, you can send them out an email, probably do the same thing, right? Working small groups, going through some of the issues, I think are really important. I think it really is important to focus on people. I think schools are realizing that. I did a workshop during administrator days, actually, for a Class B school, and they wanted to talk about some of their goals for the year, but I'd been given some background of what some of the issues were. Every one of those faculty members had something happening in their lives that made it very difficult. And one had lost a parent. The athletic director had to fire, if I can use that term, to fire a coach that was a good friend of his. There was an illness in the administrative team. And I think it was so important for them to talk about that and how they could support each other. And what I found is they really do support each other. And that's one of the strengths, I think, of a good administrative team, or a good faculty relationship with administrators. The one thing I would throw out, just a piece of advice, we're talking about meetings, and this, I'm not sure that I read this, but it's just something I did. I thought it really helped. Sometimes you'll be in a meeting and one person will kind of dominate some of the discussion and maybe try to convince you to do something different. At the end, and sometimes people believe that's what was decided. At the end of every administrative team meeting that I had, I always asked the question, what did we decide today? Because people will go out of a meeting having heard a person who wanted to go one direction, and maybe you were really going to go another direction, or the team was going to go a different direction, but still sometimes they walk out of there thinking that has occurred. On topic 7 was the board interview, and this is probably one that some of you missed the boat on, because you don't want to be lecturing your future boss about what they should know about board relations, board administrative relations. You had what you really need to tell them is ways that you are going to help educate them. It might be orientation of new board members. It might be, I think a thing that everybody should say at a board interview is, I want to meet with each of you individually, probably over lunch, and we'll talk about some of the interests you have, and maybe where you think this school should be going. They really like to know that you're going to listen to them, what they have to say. But I think it really is important that you can establish guidelines. There's how a book tells you should do it. You get out there in the real world, and I know we've got another student who's going into a position that's seeing that the board is micromanaging, and how do you deal with that? Those are discussions probably for another time, but I think it's important that you understand the role and the difference. But the question was, how are you going to inform them, and how are you going to work with them to come to a consensus? I know Trent had a nice chart that showed who should handle what. When I worked with boards, I used a chart that gave certain activities, certain things, the purchase of buses, or calling off school, or whatever, and there were 4 different things that you could respond to, who you thought should do that. If that was responsibility of the board member or responsibility of the superintendent. And then I would have boards fill those out with the superintendent and talk about afterwards, and get a consensus of what is the way it should be done, and an outsider can tell them that, rather than a superintendent who works for them. Topic 8 was the board administrative policies, and you had, I won't talk much about that. You had some really good situations and good information. I just think that going to other websites is really a good thing to do occasionally. So, how is this school handling that? As far as the course itself, everything seems to be going pretty well. Most of you are keeping up, which in a 4-week session is an issue. The thing that I do want to remind you is some of you are working ahead, and normally I don't open these up so that it's about 2 weeks ahead. Well, with this summer session and people having vacations, it's not, they want to work ahead. I opened the whole course up, but don't forget to go back. Some of you haven't gone back and responded to other people, and it's hurt your grades. You'd be better off to go back and do that now. I mean, I'll discount it some, but it's really important that you see other people's ideas and you respond to those. So, if you have any questions, I've had a couple of students that I've called. I wasn't sure where they were at. Feel free to give me a call on the cell. Usually I'm somewhere around here, or email me and I'll get back to you. Most of you have done a pretty good job of using the questions about the course forum, and that's probably the quickest one, although sometimes it's hard to explain. The other thing is I make comments with the grade book, and I've surveyed students about that, and they prefer that to me emailing to the UNK address. So if I make a comment and you don't understand, or it's not really what you meant, why, don't be afraid to email me or give me a call. Probably email would be the quickest, but I think that's probably all I have to say, and it's probably too much. So thank you.